The day of the wall reading felt colder than most, though the spring sun shone deceptively through the high windows of Alden Solicitors in the heart of Cambridge. Eliza Whitmore stood in the corridor, her hands clenched inside her coat pockets, listening to the faint echo of voices behind the heavy oak door. Her breath trembled in her throat. It had been exactly 2 weeks since her father, Reginald Whitmore, passed away. The man who raised her in strict silence, who rarely smiled in her direction, and whose approval she chased her entire life like a shadow that never belonged to her. The door creaked open. A tall young assistant in a dark suit nodded stiffly and said, "They're ready for you, Miss Whitmore." She stepped in slowly. The scent of old paper, furniture polish, and polished leather hit her at once. Her siblings were already seated. Hugo, with his gold watch flashing beneath his cuff, leaned back with legs crossed, and Clarice, dressed in a pale pink blouse and pearl earrings, sat with a look of effortless disdain. She didn't greet them. They didn't greet her. Mr. Alden, the family's long-standing solicitor, offered a thin smile as she Saturday, "We shall begin." A long pause followed. The tension was so thick it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. "As per the last and final will and testament of Mr. Reginald Whitmore," he began, "the following arrangements have been made." Eliza's heart pounded in her ears. To Mr. Hugo Whitmore and Miss Clarice Whitmore, he leaves the entirety of his estate. This includes the ancestral manor in Norfolk, all current and future business shares, and all remaining financial assets, without restriction. Clarice let out a small gasp of triumph. Hugo smirked with satisfaction. Mr. Alden turned to Eliza. For Miss Eliza Whitmore, he hesitated, and then picked up a small, cream-colored envelope from the pile of legal documents. "Your father instructed that you receive this personally." Eliza's fingers were ice as she reached for the envelope. She could feel their eyes on her. Judging. Mocking. Waiting. She opened it slowly. There was no check. No deed. Just a piece of thick paper with ink that looked deliberately rushed. It read, "You were never meant to be anything." She stared at the words for several seconds, not quite believing them. No explanation. No closure. Not even a cruel joke. Just that. Hugo leaned back with a satisfied huff. "Well, I suppose that settles everything." Clarice smiled sweetly. "You always did prefer poetry, Eliza. Consider it a final verse." Eliza said nothing. She folded the note neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and rose to her feet. Mr. Alden cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Miss Whitmore, if there is any matter you wish to contest." "No," she interrupted gently. "Thank you." She turned and walked out, her steps echoing on the marble tiles. No one called after her. Outside, the wind swept through the streets of Cambridge. The trees bent under its force, and the sky turned a deep grey, as if mourning with her. But Eliza didn't flinch. She walked with purpose, her mind racing. They thought they had won. That she was finished. But Eliza had nothing to lose now. And when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to fight for. 3 days had passed since the wall reading, yet the bitter aftertaste lingered on Eliza's tongue like spoiled wine. She'd locked herself away in the small flat she rented above a flower shop in the outskirts of Ely, away from the echo of her family's laughter and the headlines splashed across society pages. Heiress shocked as Whitmore daughter left penniless. They didn't know the half of it. She hadn't eaten much, barely slept, and had only left the flat once, to throw the hateful letter into the fire. But the words still burned behind her eyes. "You were never meant to be anything." She replayed it over and over, each time like a fresh wound. Until a knock at her door interrupted the silence. Cautiously, she opened it. There stood a man in his early 30s, tall, with dark curls that fell just above his eyes and a faint scar along his left cheek. He wore a battered brown coat, rain-soaked at the shoulders, and held a worn leather satchel in one hand. "Eliza Whitmore?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "My name's Thomas Greaves. I worked with your father. Not officially. Not publicly. But closely." Eliza narrowed her eyes. "Are you here to deliver another insult? Or did you forget to hand me a second envelope?" Thomas gave a humorless smile. "No. I'm here because he lied to you. About everything." She didn't move. "What do you mean?" "Reginald didn't just leave you out of the will. He spent the last 10 years hiding something. Something he thought no one would ever find." She opened the door wider, motioning him in. The flat was barely warm, and a half-finished cup of tea sat cold on the counter. He sat without being asked, pulling out a stack of papers from his satchel. "Your father had a shadow business. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. And something else. A separate inheritance. Not in your name, but meant for you. If you can prove who you really are." Eliza stared at him, unsure if she was being played. Thomas continued, "I know this is a lot. But you need to understand, Reginald Whitmore made enemies. Dangerous ones. And I believe he knew his time was running short. That's why he left you out of the will. To protect you." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Protect me? He humiliated me. He had no choice. They were watching. If they suspected you knew anything." His words trailed off. She leaned forward, voice quiet but steady. "Why are you telling me this?" Thomas met her gaze. "Because I promised him. And because I owe your mother my life." Eliza froze. Her mother had died when she was just 10. A ghost no one in the family ever spoke of. "What do you know about my mother?" she whispered. Thomas looked away. "More than you do. And if you want the truth, Eliza, you'll have to dig up every secret they buried with her." Eliza's chest rose and fell in a heavy breath. The room suddenly felt colder, tighter. But something inside her sparked, curiosity, fury, maybe even hope. The truth wasn't gone. It was waiting. It was nearly midnight when Eliza returned to the old Whitmore estate. The tall iron gates were locked, but she knew the side path through the trees, the one her mother used to sneak her down during garden parties when the other guests grew too loud. The night air was damp, and the soil soft beneath her boots as she climbed the fence, heart racing. She hadn't set foot here since the funeral. Every window of the manor was dark, except for one faint glow upstairs, likely her stepmother's room. Eliza didn't care. She moved swiftly, finding the cellar entrance near the greenhouse, just as she remembered. Inside, the air smelled of dust and forgotten years. She flicked on her phone's torch, illuminating row after row of crates and furniture draped in white cloth. Her footsteps echoed off stone walls. She was searching for something her father had told her about when she was little, a chest, hidden beneath the cellar stairs. A place only her mother ever dared open. She found it, half buried behind old paintings. The lock had rusted, but she managed to pry it open. Inside was a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were yellowed, the ink faded. But the handwriting, elegant, slanted, was unmistakably her mother's. Eliza sat on the floor and began to read. October 17th. He said they'd never believe me. That even if I screamed the truth, the name Whitmore would bury it. But I have to protect her. I have to protect Eliza. Her fingers trembled. She turned another page. They think I'm weak. But I've made copies. Hidden the documents. If anything happens to me, she'll find them one day. She has to. Page after page revealed a life Eliza had never known, her mother trapped in a gilded prison, silenced, threatened, and ultimately erased. But she'd fought back in the only way she could. By leaving behind a trail. At the back of the diary, tucked between the last pages, was a faded photograph. Eliza and her mother, laughing in the garden. And on the back, scrawled in the same delicate script, "Look beneath the summer house floorboards." Eliza stood, the diary clutched to her chest. She remembered the summer house, an old, ivy-covered structure near the edge of the estate. They used to sit there and sip lemonade. No one had touched it in years. As she crept outside, the cold air bit at her cheeks. The garden was wild now, unkempt, like the house itself. But the summer house stood firm, its wooden walls weathered but intact. She forced the door open. Inside, moonlight spilled through broken glass panes. She dropped to her knees, heart pounding, and pried at the wooden floor. Her fingers bled, her breath sharp in the silence. Then she found it. A metal box, sealed tight. She pulled it out and stared. Inside this box could be the truth her father tried to bury, and the key to everything he left behind. The box was heavier than it looked. Eliza carried it back into the manor, careful to stay in the shadows. The house creaked like it was holding its breath, mourning secrets long buried. She locked herself in what used to be the library, now just a shell of dust and rotting books. With trembling hands, she broke the rusted latch. The lid gave way. Inside, a thick stack of papers, bound with string and smelling faintly of lavender, the scent her mother always wore. At the very top, a birth certificate. Eliza's. But the name next to "father" made her freeze. Not Albert Whitmore. It read, Thomas Merrick. Her hands shook as she flipped through the documents. Legal letters, paternity tests, sealed envelopes, evidence. It was all here. Proof that her father, the man who raised her, wasn't her father at all. And that he'd known. For years. A letter, handwritten and marked, for Eliza. When she's ready. She opened it. "My darling girl," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be long gone. You may hate me for what I've hidden, but I beg you to understand. I didn't do it out of fear, I did it to protect you. Albert was never your father. He knew it. That's why he despised me. Why he made my life here unbearable." Eliza's breath caught. Thomas Merrick, he was the love I lost to the cruelty of wealth and reputation. He was gentle, kind. He wanted to run away with me, to raise you in peace. But Albert found out. And he used his name, his power, to destroy everything. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "But I left the truth for you. So one day, you could reclaim your life. Don't let them erase you, Eliza. You are not a Whitmore." Eliza stood in silence, the letter pressed to her chest. Everything made sense now. Why her father was always distant. Why her stepmother treated her like a stain on the family name. She wasn't one of them. She never had been. A noise outside startled her. She glanced toward the library door, heart hammering. Footsteps. Someone else was in the house. She quickly gathered the documents back into the box, blew out the candle, and pressed herself into the shadows. The handle twisted. Light crept in as the door cracked open. Eliza held her breath. A figure stepped inside. It wasn't her stepmother. It was someone she hadn't seen in years. Someone she thought had disappeared for good. The flickering light from the hallway spilled into the library as the door creaked fully open. Eliza could hardly believe her eyes. Jonah. The name left her lips like a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jonah Merrick stood in the doorway, his face older, weathered by time, but unmistakably him, her childhood friend. No, more than that. The boy who had disappeared without a word when they were 16. The one she thought had vanished forever. "Eliza," he said softly, stepping into the room. "You found it, didn't you?" She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. I came as soon as I heard about Albert's will, he continued, closing the door gently behind him. And about what he left you. Or rather, what he didn't. Eliza looked at him, confused and cautious. How do you know about any of this? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled letter. Your mother wrote to me. Years ago. Before she passed. Eliza's eyes widened. But you never came. I tried, he said, his voice thick with regret. Albert had me thrown out the moment I stepped foot on Whitmore land. Said if I ever returned, I'd be dealt with. Eliza felt her heart twist. She remembered that day, her 16th birthday. Jonah was supposed to come. He never did. She cried herself to sleep, thinking he'd forgotten her. You didn't leave me, she whispered. Never, he said. They sent me away. He walked closer, eyes flicking to the box on the desk. So, you know. She nodded. Thomas Merrick. He's your father, too. Isn't he? Jonah gave a solemn nod. Half-brother, looks like. I always wondered why my father kept a photograph of a little girl hidden in his drawer. I thought maybe, but he never told me her name. Eliza turned away, emotions boiling inside her. I don't know what to do, Jonah. Everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie. Jonah placed a hand on her shoulder. Then it's time to start over. But not alone. Their eyes met. And for a brief moment, in the crumbling manner that had broken both their pasts, something whole began to form again. But outside, under the grey English sky, a car engine roared. They both turned to the window. It was her stepmother. Back early. And she wasn't alone. A black car pulled up behind hers. And from it stepped a man in a grey coat, carrying a leather briefcase. Jonah's face darkened. That's Barrister Langton. Family law. Eliza's stomach sank. They're going to fight me. Legally. Try to take even this away. She looked at Jonah. I won't let them, she said. He nodded. Then we'd better be ready. The drawing room of Whitmore Hall, once a place of quiet contemplation, now felt like the battleground of a silent war. Eliza sat tall in the armchair, hands folded tightly in her lap, heart thudding beneath her ribs. Across from her sat Jonah, his gaze never straying from the door. And beside them, perched like a hawk ready to strike, was Barrister Langton, immaculately dressed, every word calculated. Miss Whitmore, he began, voice smooth and cold, you are currently residing on this property under questionable entitlement. Eliza said nothing, waiting. According to Sir Albert's will, all assets, including Whitmore Hall, are now under the control of Lady Clarissa and her son, Thomas. You were not named as beneficiary. Eliza met his eyes. And yet, here I am. And here is this. She placed the small wooden box on the table, sliding it toward him. Langton's brow furrowed. What is that? Evidence, Jonah replied before Eliza could speak. Letters. A deed. A confession signed in Sir Albert's own hand. Langton opened the box, flicking through the papers with the air of a man hoping to find forgeries. But his expression darkened as he read the final page. Eliza leaned in slightly. My mother was Albert's legal wife. Their marriage was never annulled. Lady Clarissa's union with him. Void. Everything passed on to her and Thomas was based on deception. Langton composed himself quickly, but Eliza caught the twitch in his jaw. Such matters will require legal review. They already have, Jonah said, placing another envelope on the table. We've submitted the documents to the registry and filed a claim through the family court. You're here to intimidate her. It won't work. The door opened behind them. Lady Clarissa entered, dressed in mourning black, but there was no grief on her face, only fury. You ungrateful brat, she hissed, eyes locked on Eliza. How dare you bring this filth into my home? It was never yours, Eliza said, rising to her feet. Clarissa marched forward, towering over her. You think some letters and a faded memory will change anything? You're nothing but a servant's mistake. Jonah stood quickly. Say that again, and I'll make sure you answer for it in court. But Clarissa was unfazed. You'll see. The court won't side with a bastard girl and a long-lost charity case. This estate belongs to us. No, Eliza said, voice steady. It belongs to the truth. Langton stood. My client will see you in court. We expect a response to the formal claim within the week. With that, he turned and left. Clarissa followed, throwing one last glare over her shoulder. As the door shut, the room seemed to exhale with relief. Jonah turned to Eliza. That went better than I expected. But Eliza's eyes remained on the box. This was just the beginning. Outside, clouds gathered. A storm was coming. And Eliza was ready for it. The courthouse in central London stood cold and formidable, its stone facade casting long shadows in the morning sun. Inside, the tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut. Eliza sat on the left, Jonah beside her, his fingers laced tightly on the table. Across the aisle, Lady Clarissa and Thomas sat flanked by their legal team, expressions locked in scorn. The judge, a grey-haired man with sharp eyes, glanced over the documents presented. This case, he said with a measured voice, raises serious allegations of fraud, misrepresentation, and unlawful inheritance. Eliza's pulse roared in her ears. The first witness called was Marianne, the elderly housekeeper who had served at Whitmore Hall for over 30 years. She walked slowly to the stand, her voice trembling but resolute. I remember when Sir Albert brought Eliza's mother to the estate, she began. They were married in private. He loved her truly. Clarissa came later, and everything changed. Clarissa scoffed, but the judge raised a hand. Continue. He told me to keep it secret. Said it would protect them. But he never stopped loving Eliza's mother. And Eliza, she was his pride. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jonah gave Eliza a firm nod. Next, a handwriting expert confirmed the authenticity of Sir Albert's confession, the document that revealed his long-hidden marriage and regret over keeping Eliza in the shadows. Clarissa's barrister stood. If I may, Your Honor, these claims rest on old letters and memories. Emotions don't decide legal ownership. Jonah rose. But facts do. The marriage certificate was never annulled. Clarissa's marriage was invalid. Which makes Eliza the rightful heir. Clarissa stood suddenly. This is absurd. I lived with that man for 20 years. He loved me, he. But did he marry you legally? The judge cut in. Clarissa hesitated, her mouth opening, then closing. Her silence echoed louder than any scream. Thomas leaned forward. Mum, you told me everything was legal. She ignored him. Jonah stepped forward again. One more thing, Your Honor. We have financial records. Money funneled from Whitmore's charity trust into Clarissa's personal accounts. She didn't just take the house. She stole from the legacy Sir Albert wanted to preserve. The judge narrowed his eyes. Miss Whitmore, your claim is more than compelling. But a decision will be made in 2 days. Court is adjourned. As the gavel fell, Clarissa turned sharply on her heel and stormed out. Thomas followed, slower, confused, his world unraveling. Eliza remained seated, her hands shaking. You did it, Jonah whispered. She shook her head. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, the press was already gathering, cameras flashing. Eliza paused on the steps, letting the sunlight hit her face. Let them see me now, she thought. Let them see what truth looks like when it finally breaks free. 2 days passed in silence that throbbed like a storm waiting to break. Eliza sat alone in the sunroom of Jonah's flat, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't sipped. The phone lay on the table, still and quiet. Outside, grey clouds rolled over the London skyline, casting shadows on her reflection in the window. A sharp knock at the door made her flinch. Jonah entered moments later, his expression unreadable. "They've ruled," he said softly. Eliza stood without a word. The drive back to the courthouse was a blur of traffic lights and pounding hearts. Inside, the courtroom was already filling. Lady Clarissa arrived moments before the judge, dressed in black as though mourning something no one else could see. When the judge entered, everyone rose. In review of the evidence provided, he began, and after careful consideration of all testimonies and financial records, this court finds the claim of Miss Eliza Whitmore not only valid, but overwhelmingly supported. Clarissa gripped the bench beside her. It is the decision of this court that all estates, including Whitmore Hall and associated assets, are to be restored to Miss Whitmore, rightful heir to the Whitmore name and inheritance. A gasp broke the stillness. Clarissa whispered, "No." Thomas turned to her. "You lied about everything." "I did it for you," she hissed. "Everything was for you." But Thomas rose, shaking his head. "You did it for yourself." Eliza barely heard them. The words still echoed in her ears, rightful heir. The court dismissed, and Jonah turned to her, eyes wide. "It's yours, Eliza." "Everything." She didn't smile. Not yet. Back at Whitmore Hall, the air felt different. Marianne greeted her at the door, tears in her eyes. "Welcome home, Miss Eliza." For the first time, those words sounded right. She walked the halls slowly, her footsteps soft on the grand staircase. She opened the door to her father's study, untouched, filled with memories and dust. A portrait of Sir Albert stared back at her from the wall. "You could have told me," she murmured. "But I know why you didn't. You were afraid." She took the letter from her pocket, Sir Albert's final words. "If this letter reaches you, then you have found the truth. I never stopped loving your mother. I never stopped watching over you. Forgive me for my silence, but I trust you'll do what's right." Eliza sat in his old chair, sunlight pouring through the tall windows. This time, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming a legacy lost to lies. And in that silence, she finally felt whole.